Celica GT GTS 7th generation rack and pinion rebuild. This has got 23 years on it, and it was leaking on both sides, and it was because I didn't replace the bellows soon enough, so they cracked, or one of them cracked, let some dirt in, and that most likely caused the seal failure on that side and also over on the other side. On getting it out, it's a pain in the butt. I mean, even with the engine out, if the transmission was out, it would be a little easier. I had that motor mount out of the way. The transmission was suspended by the crane, and because it's long, the way out was to the passenger side that way. I couldn't get it out that direction. What you do is right underneath that boot there is a universal joint, and that's where you disconnect it from the steering, and you want to take something and mark the position of it. And the other thing I did was I took off the 2 bolts on the back of the exhaust, and then it kind of teeters on there, and then lifted this up to get that out of the way. But to get it out, you got to twist it like 3 or 4 different directions to just fit it through each piece. But it'll do it. If your vehicle, if your engine's not out, you have to remove the whole subframe. This would stay, and you'd need to suspend it. The rack goes through this motor mount, which when the rack is in there, it's a pain in the butt to get that motor mount in and out. Even with it where I have access to it right here. If you're not, the engine's not in the vehicle or taken out of the vehicle, you got to drop this whole subframe, suspend this thing up, and the subframe's gonna drop down, and this thing can remain suspended, or you can actually probably just unbolt that 1 bolt and it'll come down with it. Would be easier than doing all 4 of the other. And then once you drop the subframe, then you can unbolt the rack and pinion. So I bought a kit of all the O-rings and seals. I couldn't find any videos on the internet of this model of rack, because I would imagine it's used on other vehicles, but I wasn't able to find any. And so to a certain degree I wasn't as prepared when I started it, and that's why I gotta wait for a 30mm socket to come deep from Amazon to get this thing off of here. So I was just taking this off, put it out of the way. What you're gonna need on the ends here, this is narrow, 6 millimeters at the most, and it's 29 millimeters. So you need an open-ended wrench that's narrow. So what I did was I took this cheesy wrench here that's 1/1/8, and it was kind of sloppy, so it was actually bigger than it was supposed to be, so it fit. And because 29 millimeters is larger than 1/1/8, I had another big wrench like this, and it was better and wouldn't slide over it. So I ground down the thing to make it fit. And the other piece, this here, is 22 millimeters, so I used that on a breaker bar. So yeah, you're gonna need 30 millimeter for that deep to get that thing out. These are the marks for the steering position, and what I did was, because they can line up a couple of times depending on how far you rotate it around. So I measured where this thing was, and it was recessed 5 millimeters at the most. And then on the other end, I measured it too. So I'll be able to find where that piece was. The steering wheel, just from where the nut on the universal joint was, I had to turn it upside down. So I noted on my thing, on my paperwork, that it's to the right side, moved to, so it's not centered because I couldn't reach the thing. Took one end off. I need to twist this around and then this will come out the other end, similar deal, and then take that end off, and then inside here there's a snap ring that you need to do, and hopefully that's big enough that my snap rings will fit down in there. I don't have to buy another snap ring because it's down about right here. So all right, so the other thing is, so about these, and it came with zip ties, which is crazy. So I wanted to reuse the metal clips that are on here, and I ordered some metal clamps that you tighten down with like a CD boot, and I'm going to put metal on there instead of the zip ties, which zip ties are just, they're not going to last. Because here's the thing, this thing has lasted 23 years now, and I shouldn't have to deal with it for another 20 years, but zip ties won't last 20 years. So you want to put some metal on there. So yeah, I have the Toyota factory service manual, the other one's up in my house, and it details all the steps to pulling this thing apart. So I'm going to be stepping through that once I get my 30mm socket to pull that apart, and I'm also going to redo or rebuild the power steering pump itself, because I've got it all out. So yeah, the unique tools you're going to need: 22mm to go onto here, 29mm to go on there, which is the same as 1 1/8 with that thing on it, and then that 30mm. Oh, and some Moly Lube is the other thing. Okay, so I've removed both ends. I turned this until that side came out of there. Right now, the other end is flush. There's a snap ring in there, and I can easily get a hold of it with a pair of needle nose pliers. So nothing special required there. I received my 30mm deep socket, so I'm going to proceed now. The next step is to remove the rack guide spring cap, conical spring washer, and rack guide sub-assembly, which is everything underneath here. And in the manual, that's this piece right here. So it's going to be this, and then the next thing is taking that piece out. Okay, so that came out really easy. That's the cap right there. This is the conical spring washer, and then no magnet. The next piece is the rack guide sub-assembly, which is right there. This came out really easy. I grabbed a hole at the top of this with the needle nose pliers. It probably would have come out if I just flipped the thing over and let gravity do its work. The next piece is the rack housing cap. The rack housing cap came out pretty easily. Gonna need that 30mm deep socket for it, and so this is gonna need an O-ring on it to replace, and then there's a seal on the inside. Next is pull out the control valve assembly, which you can see it has a whole bunch of Teflon rings on there, and there is a gear on the bottom, so when I pull it out, I'm going to have to twist it to pull it up. So that came out pretty easy. There are the 4 O-rings on there. The next step is to get that snap ring out of there. After taking out the snap ring, there is this cylinder end stopper that comes out really easily. And then there's a seal, and the seal is in there pretty hard. That's what's holding the thing in. The way this works, this seal is right about here. This is in the middle, and there's another seal right here. From here over, this is the gear, and that's going to be Moly Lube. But so there's a seal here that keeps the hydraulic fluid in. The power assist, when you're turning to the left, there's a little torsion spring here that sends fluid over to the left, and then same thing over to the right. So I got this out. The way I did it was I put the tie rod end back in there and clamped this down to my bench, and then just yanked this thing out like you would like a slide hammer. Took about 3 or 4 times. It's going to come out all at once. and because it's just in there a little bit. So now there's still another seal in there, right around in here. So the plan is, what you do is from this side, I am going to put a socket on an extension and then hammer it out that way. What I did was I got the largest socket that would fit down here. There isn't a whole lot of this exposed. Part of it, there's a lip in there, so you've only got a little bit to get on it. So it's a 28 millimeter outside diameter socket. I got some Moly Lube, figured I'd put that on there to keep it from scraping up the sides of any possibility of that. And it actually did just slide really good in there. Put it in there, tapped it with my drilling hammer, and then the seal came flying out the other side. The last seal is down in there a couple of inches. Toyota has a tool that grabs a hold of it from the top side and you pull it out. There are a couple notches that it can get into. What you can do as an alternative is the inside diameter of that, this washer is 28 millimeter. Can't get any bigger than that. And then came in from the other side and stuck the washers in there. Crank down this, and that will pull up the seal. So this bolt, I happen to have like a whole bunch of kit stuff that I put together. This bolt's 100 millimeters long, just a 6 millimeter bolt, and then this thing needs to be 28 millimeter, and that'll just fit in there and pull up on it. Let's see here, what else? I've already pushed the seal out of this. All it is take a socket and put it down. I started cleaning this up. I used a wooden dowel to push some paper towels through there, and then after that use some brake parts cleaner to clean everything out. So I'm going to clean everything up and then start replacing the seals. These rings, NDO rings, have to be in power steering fluid, automatic transmission fluid. So I just put them all in one thing and then dump some automatic transmission fluid in there, and then I'll pull them out when they're wet. What I did to replace this seal was I wrapped a socket with electrical tape to make sure that it wouldn't scrape the sides. The insides of this, or these 4 Teflon rings, I believe they are, so they need a sealed surface, so I didn't want to mar up that. Note that it goes in there what is normally kind of like you think of being upside down. The spring side is on this side because it's holding pressure into here. The other side of this, from here to there, is Moly Lube. That's the gearing of it. The hydraulics are from here to here, and then end up going over here to here. So I took out the old Teflon ring. They're hard. Even the new ones are hard. I mean, I knew I was going to destroy this one, so I didn't care. What I didn't realize until I read the instructions is that there's still an O-ring down inside there that needs to come out. So I'm going to replace that O-ring and then replace the Teflon ring. And they're really hard, and the way they explain in the manual to do it is to take your fingers, wrong one, and expand it by going around in circles, and then stick the thing on there. And then once you're done, you got to push it down with your hands to seat it. These don't have O-rings, those are just Teflon rings, so these are going to be fun. The Teflon ring on the steering rack was pretty stiff and took a lot of that twisting around to stretch it out to put it on there. That one went on really good and tight because it's not moving around at all. The other 4 of these, they're a different color and they're a different material and they're a lot softer. You don't need to stretch them out nearly as much, just a little bit, and they're not really, they're still kind of loose. So I'm not sure if that's going to cause a problem for me. This has got a little tapered edge, and I just need to make sure they don't double over when I stick them down in there. The next step is to put the seal in here. Got another socket that's the same size as the seal. Coated it with electrical tape to keep it from scraping the sides up. And all of these seals, they want you to put power steering fluid, automatic transmission fluid, on the lip and get them wet before you stick them in there. And the other thing, like with this seal and this seal here, the shaft is large and then it tapers down right where the seal is at. And then the same thing for in here. So it's just getting it out that quarter inch, or getting it in that quarter inch. So this thing is just going to slide further in there. This is the next seal to go in. I'm going to kind of use it as a demonstration for the last seal. What I did was I stuck this up on end, and I dropped this down in there, and so it's going to go tumbling down. And 50-50 chance it landed the right way. I could see down that it was. But it didn't. I was just going to jar it out and put it down again because it's going to end up falling. So then use the and it was coated with automatic transmission fluid. Use the socket to hit it down in there. I wasn't certain if it was in far enough, so what I did was I have a borescope. It's about $30, they're pretty inexpensive, and then it runs on Wi-Fi, and you can look down inside there. And the first time I looked, there was a gap, and I didn't get it all. And so it's in there now. And so just got to notice that there's a little bit of black around the outside, and so that's what I can see on the borescope. So the next thing to go in is the steering rack itself, and that needs to get some automatic transmission fluid on it. After that's in, then I can put this seal in from this side, and there's a stop that is really going to set the depth of that thing. The rack went in pretty easy. This end here, because it's coming in that way, I put a bunch of automatic transmission fluid on there to lube it up, and then when I was putting it in, I just kind of twisted it and kept going back and forth and get it in. And the same thing, really. So you're getting past the front end past the seal here, and then the Teflon ring here. Same thing with this. Lubed it up with a whole bunch of automatic transmission fluid, and then just kind of went back and forth and worked it in slowly, going in like that. The next one is the seal that goes on here. They say to put electrical tape on there to keep it from getting damaged on that piece. I didn't mention that on the other side. And then the stopper collar is what goes on after that. When this came out, it had Moly Lube on it. I cleaned it all up. I'm going to put a little bit more Moly Lube on the inside of here and where these like grooves are. There's no mention of it in the manual, but it makes sense this thing should have some lube on it. So when I was first putting this seal in this side, I was using the socket, but it really didn't want to stay straight. So it's going to sit right about here. So what I did was I stopped, and then that stopper is the next thing. So I used that to push it in, and then put the snap ring into place. Then to make sure that it was straight, I pulled the rack back like with the tie rod on there, kind of like when I was doing the thing to get the seal out, but just not real hard. And did that to make sure that this is straight, and then the same thing over here. This one I was real confident in the straightness of it. This one I wasn't, because where it was going in. The next step is to install the control valve assembly. So I'm going to sop this up with automatic transmission fluid. Put those Teflon rings in one at a time. There's a little bevel here to help, so hopefully it shouldn't be too bad. The control valve housing is in. Before you install it, you want to put Moly Lube on the pinion gear, and you want to put Moly Lube down on the rack and in where there's a seat. There's a seat there that is actually replaceable. The bearing, and you want to lube that thing up really good. That'll make putting this in a lot easier. Just kind of take your time wiggling it back and forth, kind of going in a circle. The first two are pretty easy because you can see down past the bearing. If you had a tool to take this tri-nut off, it could probably be easier to do it that way than put the bearing in last, because then you could see what you're doing and you can actually, push it into place. But so that's in. The next step, I've already replaced the seal here. I gotta put some power steering fluid all over that, and then this O-ring, and then torque that down to 54 foot-pounds. And then after that, it's going to be the rack guide spring cap, conical spring, and this thing's just going into there, and that also needs a bunch of Moly Lube. The next step is to tighten down the rack guide spring cap. When I took this off, it came off really easy. It was very gentle, kind of surprised me. And the way that so what that's doing is that is pushing down on the rack right where the pinion gear is at. So there's a number of steps that I'm going to show you here. That shows you how to tighten this down. You're going to put Loctite on here, so you need to clean everything up. I use brake parts cleaner to clean that up so the Loctite will work. So there's a couple different steps to this, but the very end result is based on how much torque it requires to turn this. And so that would be dependent on having the correct tool from Toyota to put onto here and then attach to what would ideally be a beam style torque wrench, so you could see what it is, because what they're wanting is 11.5 inch-pounds of torque to move this thing. So there's going to be going through a couple of steps to get to that point. So first step, apply sealant to the rack guide spring cap. Temporarily install the cap. Adjust to total preload. So we're going to put in the steering rack, or we're going to put on the ends to keep it from going in too far. So we torque the rack guide spring cap down to 18 foot-pounds on here. But then we're going to back it off 12 degrees. Then turn the rack back and forth a couple of times, and then completely loosen the cap. And then that's when you would use the little tool with a beam style torque wrench to tighten the cap down to where it requires 11.5 inch-pounds of torque to turn this. So you're tightening this and you're checking the torque on that. So I don't have the tool to do that, so I'm going to be just guesstimating. And what that really comes down to, 11.5 inch-pounds is not a lot of force. It surely shouldn't take much. And right now, if I grab a hold of this thing with my other hand, I can turn this. And so I imagine it shouldn't be much tighter than that. It shouldn't be where it takes a whole lot of force, because if I've got this thing coming out almost a foot, it shouldn't take much very force to put on there. The only other thing, these clamps that I've been using on the table worked out really well for holding this down. And this has got a real big edge on it, so I had to go under it, and I had to work on it with the rack in really far. I got another workbench that's thinner, and I'm going to go do the work over there so that I can put it up against the edge, and then my ratchet will work going up there. In the manual, they were using like a vise for a whole bunch of stuff, and this has worked out just really well. Kind of basic, just some C-clamps. If you had a smaller table, you wouldn't need big old 6-inch C-clamps. So I'm going to move this over to my other bench and then torque this down. It has been adjusted correctly, I believe. The final step is to use a punch and a hammer to stake 2 parts in opposing positions on the rack guide spring cap to keep it from unloosening. What I did is when I got it close, because I estimated based on the tension, basically thinking that when you tighten it down, it really shouldn't be adding a lot of resistance to where you could stop at. So I got it close, and then what I did was I just put it back right where the 2 divots were to begin with, because I could tell it's definitely not 180 degrees in either other direction. So I put back where it was and then just used the punch to try and reinforce those 2 things. So it should be back right where it was, and like I said, I did put the divots in there. Next step is I'm going to take these off, verify that the system is sealed by using a vacuum pump on each of the ports. I originally didn't take that tubing off because I wasn't putting it in a vise, and so I just put it on the table. But so I ended up taking it off, and both sides do hold a vacuum. In the manual they have this hooked up to a T in both of those at the same time. I just tested them individually unplugged, and it was actually good, but I put a plug in there to kind of serve the purpose of what they were trying to achieve, and then tested them one at a time, and it's all good. So this is how I'm getting the bushings out of there. We've got this rubber area right here. First cut that off. You see I cut off there. Already got that one out there. So I cut that off on both sides. Got myself a bolt, put a nut on there to make it go deeper and like so it's not coming out the other side into my socket. Put that onto there. And this onto here. And then I got my giant C-clamp. It'll just push the thing out. So is one method. So push that thing down. It comes out really easy. This is what I got left. I mean, I got to cut off what I can off of that, and then, cut off what I can off of that, and then burn off the rest before I reuse them with these. This rubber was definitely degrading. I didn't even touch this one, and that thing's broken. These pieces, I put them in the vise one at a time and kind of moved around and just used a utility knife to scrape off as much as I could. Got most of it off of there. Used a torch to heat up the rest. That made it real soft, and then use this pad and just go around on it until it came off. Just wanted to share. So first I tried using my C-clamp, and that didn't work very well because this thing swiveling was making letting that thing go out of alignment. And the way this is, it just wants to push out because it's under there under compression. Tried to use the vise. That worked out okay, but just want to share with a better way that I came up with, which is a bolt about 2.5 inches long, a washer and a nut, and then you just crank them together and it'll pull it in. While you're putting the bushings in, don't worry about the direction of these oblong holes on here. Get them in, and all you need to do is stick a 3/8 ratchet in there, and you can move it. They move really easily, but be warned that when you do that, it's going to want to start separating again. So I moved these into position, ended up with like an 8-inch gap, and I had to put the washers and the bolt on there to get them get it pushed back on there again. But that's how I straighten that out. Don't have to worry about it while you're trying to get the bushing in. It's done. Last couple notes here. When I was pulling these in with the bolts, when the spacer gets halfway in and it starts meeting the other bushing, you need to make sure that it's lined up correctly, because one edge can start pushing on the other bushing. So one of the ways to tell is that when you're going down, it shouldn't start getting harder, and if it starts getting harder, it's because that thing is caught. The bolt that I had wasn't quite 2.5 inches, so I could get another washer on there on the first attempt through. So what I did was I got it down a ways, and then I put the washer on there. So if you have a longer bolt, it might help, because the washer would help keep this thing perpendicular to the back of the bolt head. The goo that they put on here, that you put on here for these things, it's really sticky. Rubbing alcohol does a pretty good job of getting that off. So you can use that. When you go to put this assembly down in there, that's the angle. It should be at an angle so that the tooth goes into it. You can look down the shaft and see that if it's perpendicular or not. And the other thing, so I made marks on here initially to like where everything was, which kind of came out to be useless, because I'm not going to be able to stick this thing back in the same exact tooth with trying to wiggle those 4 pieces in there, and then it's like, oops, I want to move it over a tooth, and trying to get past those 4 Teflon rings. So that, but I don't think that's really necessary. What I did was I measured the distance here, and then also the distance here, which they're going to be the same, or we only really need 1. But so that's how I'm going to reline up my steering wheel. I know that to get this out for where the bolt was on the coupler, I had to turn the steering wheel 180 degrees. So I've got that held in place with my seatbelt. And so what I'm going to do when I go to put this back in is put this to the 5/16 that was supposed to be there, and then line it up with where the shaft is and whatever tooth it comes on. Because as long as the steering wheel is at that 180 degrees, I should be good. The steering rack is ready for installation. This is the low pressure return line. I had already purchased some transmission line to replace for the cooler, and it was the same size. This is 10 millimeters. The hose is 3/8 inside diameter. The outside diameter is smaller than the original hose. Because of that, so these clamps didn't work anymore, so I had to double up on some other clamps. This low pressure hose is available from a couple of vendors for about 40 bucks. The old hoses, I looked on the inside, they were cracking, and they're due. And what I ended up doing, the clamps that I had didn't fit. They weren't narrow enough. It's got to be like 6 millimeters or smaller to fit in here. And then I looked online, I really couldn't find any clamps to buy. So what I ended up using was actually really similar to the OEM installation, at least the way that I found it, which was, it used safety wire, which I assume was stainless steel. This is nickel chromium wire. It's normally used as a heating coil in like toasters and hair dryers and stuff like that. But it's really strong wire, which it doesn't need to be all that strong. I'm just trying to be better than a zip tie, but it doesn't oxidize, so that should work really good. I don't have the safety wire pliers, so I just wrapped it around there twice, which is the way the OEM was, and it makes sense to spread it out a little bit more. And I put a vice grip on each end of this and kind of twisted it around to get it started, and then just put one vice grip around there and twisted it, and it worked really well. And the marks on this, so I initially put a mark in both of these places. After I reinstalled the assembly here, the mark that was on there was useless, but I needed to put it back on there. When I put this together, I measured the distance, or when I took it apart, I measured the distance from the end of the piece there, and the same thing on the other end. And so I returned it to that depth, and then add the mark back, because this moves really easily, and just by installation I'm going to end up moving it, and I need it to be lined up. So put it there initially. After I reinstalled it, moved this to the right position, and then add the mark back. So when I go back, put it on my steering. I replaced the inner tie rods, and I'm replacing the tie rod ends. I measured the old ones and got as close as I could, and then put a mark on these. So after I install this, I'm going to drive straight to the alignment shop slowly. So that should by there. And that is all. Like, share, subscribe, and have fun rebuilding your rack and pinion. But wait, there's more. This is the OEM one, or the one that I took out, I should say. I'm pretty sure it's the OEM inner tie rod. That was 29 millimeters, and I had to get that flat wrench that was 6 millimeter or less across here. The aftermarket inner tie rod ends were 29.5 millimeters. It was like 0.2 millimeters larger than my wrench. So I ended up having to use my, a Scotch-Brite pad on here and open the gap up on this old wrench to get onto the newer one. Now there's a little bit more of a gap there, but I'm not real happy with that aftermarket thing not being the same exact size, but just wanted you to be aware of it. After rebuilding the power steering pump, and then knowing I was going to be doing the rebuilding the rack and pinion, I wanted to clean this up because it was all crusty, full of stuff, just baked onto the inside, just like the pump, and you see there's still a little bit of the residue there, but it was all over the place. So when I started doing it, I started using like carb cleaner, and that worked pretty good, but it was just creating flakes that stuck to the inside. And then if you try to use water, it just stuck to they all stuck to the inside, so it didn't really work out very well. So what I ended up doing was I put baggies on these and then use zip ties to seal them off. This is the suction line going to the power steering pump. This is the return from the cooler. On the inside here, there's a screen on both of those to catch particles. So if you clean this thing, you don't want it to be dumping it out of either one of these things because it's going to be stuck in the screen. So I closed both of these things off, and then I filled the whole thing up with some fuel injector cleaner that I had. B12 Chem Tool or something like that would probably work too. So I plugged those off, filled the whole thing up, and then I just let it sit for a while. And it dissolved most of the stuff on the outside, and it got rid of any of the real flakes. And so like all of the material that was in there just became suspended within the fuel injector cleaner. It turned black. So did some shaking around, that sort of thing, and then dumping it out this way to get out any of the particles, and you just got to keep working at it. After I got this whole thing clean, then I took off the plastic here and then did some cleaning there. There's still stuff stuck on the inside, but it's stuck. And if you start doing this, once you start loosening things, you need to get everything out of there. Otherwise, it's going to be floating around. But at the same time, a lot of those particles were floating around the system. I cleaned them out. The high pressure valve spring on my power steering pump was just full of gunk. So the amount of loose matter in here compared to what I've cleaned out is just absolutely minor. And then there's, like I said, there's two screens in here to filter things out. So that's how I clean this thing up, is let it soak, and it eventually dissolved most of the stuff on the sides. And any of the flakes and things that were around in there, I shook them around, and that dissolved them enough to where they'd rinse out.